He arrived with foreclosure papers. By dawn, the hotel was still standing, and his career was over. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the quiet streets of Silver Bay, glinting off the wet pavement from the morning drizzle. Julian Vance stepped out of his black sedan, his polished shoes clicking on the curb as he approached the Sterling Inn. The briefcase in his hand was sleek, professional, and carried the weight of his authority as senior partner at Vance & Associates. To an outsider, he appeared calm, composed, impeccably dressed, a man in control of every situation. But beneath the surface, Julian was acutely aware of the stakes. This wasn't just a delivery of documents. This was a confrontation, a collision of professional duty and unexpected personal complication. From the veranda of the Sterling Inn, Claire Sterling watched him. She had inherited the inn from her family, a sanctuary built from generations of care, love, and relentless effort. Every corner of the property spoke of history, pride, and hard work. And now, standing there in the waning sunlight, she saw a man whose polished exterior and confident stride felt like a threat to all she had fought to protect. Julian's eyes scanned the inn from the curb, assessing without judgment, calculating without emotion. He wasn't here to charm anyone. He wasn't here to intimidate either, at least not overtly. He had a duty, and duty demanded efficiency, precision, and clarity. The folder in his hand contained documents that could trigger a default, but he also knew there were pathways through them. Legal options, restructuring possibilities, if handled correctly. Claire crossed her arms as he reached the steps. "Can I help you?" Her voice was steady, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her apprehension. She regarded him like a wild animal would regard a predator, cautious, defensive, yet ready to strike if provoked. Julian gave a polite nod, his smile professional, controlled. "Claire Sterling, I'm here representing Vance & Associates. I need to deliver this." He handed her the folder, his fingers brushing the leather briefly. The contact was subtle, fleeting, but Claire flinched, half in surprise, half in instinctive distrust. She opened the folder, scanning the contents. The word default jumped out, stark and intimidating. Her pulse quickened. This is serious," she muttered, more to herself than him. Julian's gaze remained steady. "It is. But there are options," he said, voice calm, deliberate. "Legal pathways to mitigate risk. Ways to protect your interests. That's why I'm here, to present solutions." Claire's eyes flicked up, sharp and incredulous. "Solutions? You expect me to trust you? After walking in here like some corporate predator?" Julian inclined his head slightly. "Trust is earned, not given. I'm not asking for yours yet. I'm asking for your attention. Facts first, judgment later." A flash of irritation crossed Claire's face. "Facts, numbers, that's all you see, isn't it? Not people, not lives. Just property, contracts, fees." "Sometimes," Julian admitted, "sometimes the numbers are the only way to protect what matters. I'm not blind to people, but I can't ignore the reality of the situation. That's my job." The air between them was charged, dense with tension. Julian could sense Claire's defiance, but beneath it was a spark of something he could not yet define. He noted it, stored it mentally, but did not act on it. Professionally, he knew better. Claire closed the folder with a snap, the sound echoing faintly across the veranda. "I don't need a lecture," she said, voice firm. "You're just here to enforce the rules of your firm, to protect their interests, not mine." "Correct," Julian said. "I'm here to handle the situation professionally. Nothing personal. But my job also allows for solutions. I've reviewed the documents, and there is a way forward, if we act strategically." Claire's gaze narrowed. "Strategically? You think you can waltz in here, drop some papers, and then play hero?" Julian's expression didn't change, but his eyes briefly flicked to the folder. "I'm not a hero. I'm a professional. But I do have authority, senior partner access, that allows me to copy and review files before the firm formally terminates me. That means I can act to protect your interests if you allow it." Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "You're offering help? After all this? After everything that makes you my enemy?" "Not help," Julian clarified. "Strategy, guidance, options. The final decision is yours." She studied him, torn between instinctive mistrust and reluctant curiosity. There was something compelling in the calm certainty of his presence, the quiet authority of a man who had faced far worse than her suspicion. She wanted to hate him, but part of her also wanted to understand him, to see if there was more beneath the surface. Julian observed her, noting every subtle reaction, the tension in her hands, the tightening of her jaw, the alertness in her eyes. Each microexpression was data, each glance a clue to her mindset. He had navigated negotiations with CEOs, board members, and clients. But this was different. Here, stakes were human, emotional, and deeply personal. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the Sterling Inn's veranda. Julian and Claire remained there, silent but aware of the growing tension. This was the beginning of a collision course: professional duty against personal stakes, calculation against instinct, attraction against distrust. Neither knew how far the storm would go, but both felt it coming. This was the start of their war, the Sterling Clause, a story of strategy, sacrifice, and the dangerous pull of something far stronger than professional duty. The first rumble of thunder echoed across Silver Bay as Julian Vance settled into the Sterling Inn's lobby. The storm had arrived faster than anyone expected, wind lashing against the windows, sheets of rain blurring the coastline. The small town was effectively cut off from the mainland. Roads flooded, power lines swayed precariously, and the only source of light inside the inn came from candles that flickered across polished wood and soft carpets. Julian had no choice but to remain. Normally, he would have been back in the city by now, planning the next steps with his firm, navigating corporate emails and conference calls. But the storm grounded him here, making him, for the first time, a temporary guest of the very place he had come to challenge. Claire moved between tables, lighting additional candles and checking the emergency flashlights stored in a closet. She kept her movements brisk, purposeful. She would not allow fear to dominate her. But her heart pounded in ways she could not ignore. Julian's presence, mere feet away, was impossible to dismiss. He wasn't just the professional threat that had arrived earlier. Now he was forced into proximity, and every interaction carried weight. He noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the crossed arms, the sharp glances, the slight bite of her lower lip. She was wary, yet alert, clearly assessing him, judging his intentions. Julian, in turn, could feel his own restraint being tested. Here, away from the firm's offices and corporate walls, Claire was not a client, not a case. She was a person, strong, intelligent, fiercely independent. And the thought of her vulnerability under this storm, combined with her defiance, stirred an unfamiliar protective impulse within him. The hours dragged on. Rain hammered the roof, windows rattled, and the low hum of wine through the inn's eaves was almost hypnotic. Dinner was a simple affair, served at a table near the fireplace, the storm outside forcing intimacy by circumstance. Candles illuminated Claire's determined expression and Julian's carefully controlled composure. Words were sparse at first, both aware that every statement carried meaning, every gesture could ignite conflict or understanding. "You can't stay here forever," Claire said finally, breaking the silence as she poured water into 2 glasses. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, either from the chill or the tension. "I know," Julian replied, his voice calm, precise. "But the storm isn't giving me a choice." He placed the glasses on the table, careful not to overstep, careful to respect boundaries. "And while I'm here, we can use the time to discuss options. The inn, your interests, the legal situation. There's work to be done." Claire's gaze flickered to him, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "Options," she repeated. "You mean you're actually trying to help?" "I'm offering strategy," he corrected softly. "Guidance. You make the decisions. You retain full control. But my knowledge, my authority, they can give you leverage." She frowned, reluctant to show any sign of gratitude. "After all this, why would I trust you?" Her words were sharp, defensive, but Julian caught the hesitation underneath, the glimmer of uncertainty, the subtle pull towards seeing him differently. He leaned back slightly, hands folded on the table, letting the silence do the work he could not force. "Trust is earned, Claire, not given. You're right to doubt. But right now, what matters is action, not emotion. We have limited time, and the storm, it isn't going to wait for either of us." Dinner passed in tense conversation, punctuated by occasional thunderclaps and the occasional glance toward the storm-lashed windows. Claire found herself involuntarily studying him. The way he spoke, the calm precision in his movements, the almost imperceptible signs of stress he tried to hide. She realized that Julian was as committed to the outcome as she was, perhaps even more so. And that realization stirred an uneasy mix of admiration and unease in her chest. Later, when the storm showed no sign of abating, Julian focused on the physical files spread across the table. He spent hours deconstructing the firm's strategy, his mind moving with cold precision through every clause and potential loophole. Claire watched him, noting the meticulous care with which he handled the history of her family's inn. He didn't open his laptop yet. That would require a digital signature, a trail he wasn't ready to leave until he was certain of the path ahead. For now, he was simply a man measuring the strength of the walls before the siege. At one point, their hands brushed as they reached for the same folder, and both froze, tension and electricity mingling in the small space. Claire quickly pulled back, forcing a composure she barely felt. Julian did not comment, but he noticed, silently cataloging the shift, understanding that the dynamic between them was evolving under the pressure of forced proximity. Hours turned into night. The storm raged on, trapping them, forcing collaboration, forcing conversations that neither had expected. They spoke of strategy, legal options, the potential consequences, but also of themselves, briefly, almost tangentially. Julian learned of Claire's fear of losing the inn, the legacy of her family, and the years of personal investment she had poured into it. Claire learned that Julian's dedication to his firm had never been personal, until now, when he chose to act against them to protect her interests. By the time the candles had burned low, a fragile understanding had begun to emerge. Claire realized that Julian was not merely the vulture she had first assumed. He was a man capable of sacrifice, of putting someone else's welfare above his career, at least temporarily. Julian recognized the fierceness, intelligence, and courage in Claire, qualities that would make any strategy, any partnership, more potent. As the storm finally began to ease, leaving a wet, glistening silver bay in its wake, they sat in silence, the weight of the night pressing down, but also a strange sense of connection emerging. Forced proximity had forced them to see each other clearly, stripped of pretense, stripped of corporate facades. And in that clarity, the first thread of trust, tentative and flickering, began to take hold. Yet neither spoke of it aloud. Both were acutely aware that the path ahead was treacherous, that external threats loomed, and that personal vulnerability could be weaponized. For now, they simply existed in the moment, two people bound by circumstance, storm, and the unspoken understanding that the coming days would demand more courage, more risk, and perhaps the surrender of old assumptions. Morning light filtered weakly through the storm clouds lingering over Silver Bay. The Sterling Inn was quiet, almost eerily so, with the remnants of the previous night's tempest leaving the streets slick and the air thick with the scent of rain and salt. Julian Vance sat in the inn's small study, meticulously reviewing the folders he had compiled using his senior partner access. Every document had been copied legally, every clause checked, every discrepancy highlighted. This was no ordinary case. This was Claire Sterling's livelihood on the line, and his professional instincts were sharpened to a fine edge. Claire appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly damp, her expression wary. "Morning," she said, voice clipped. She held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, the other resting on the doorframe. Her eyes flicked to the spread of papers across the table. Julian looked up, gesturing to a chair. "Sit. I think I may have found a pathway to protect the inn. But we need to go through it carefully. There are risks, yes, but also a chance to restructure the obligations outlined in these contracts, legally and decisively." Claire raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "I thought your firm's only goal was to push for default. Now suddenly you're offering help?" "I'm offering options, not help," Julian corrected, calm but firm. "The firm expects results, but my position allows me to act within the bounds of my authority to provide you leverage. If we follow this strategy, you retain control. If we fail, consequences are severe. But the opportunity is real." Claire sat down reluctantly, eyes scanning the documents as Julian walked her through the plan. He pointed out clauses, contractual loopholes, and restructuring possibilities. Every suggestion was calculated, precise, and legally sound. There was no deception in his words, only professional expertise applied to a situation that demanded careful navigation. As they discussed, Claire began to notice subtle things. Julian's restraint in phrasing, his careful avoidance of patronizing language, the way he weighed risks against outcomes rather than ego. Slowly, a shift began within her. This was not a man using charm to manipulate. This was a professional, a senior partner, turning against his own firm to give her options, albeit at great personal risk. "You're doing this for me?" Claire asked finally, voice low, tinged with disbelief. "I'm doing this because it's the right move," Julian replied. "Because it can save the inn. Because sometimes the right choice requires risk, and I'm in a position to bear some of it. You'll make the final decision, but this gives you control." Claire's mind raced. She had anticipated threats, legal maneuvers, corporate pressure, but not this. Julian, a representative of the very firm threatening her property, had placed himself in jeopardy to provide her a lifeline. The realization unsettled her, stirred an unfamiliar combination of gratitude, suspicion, and something more indefinable. The hours passed as they worked through scenarios, assessed timelines, and reviewed contingencies. The storm outside had finally subsided, leaving a calm but tense atmosphere within the inn. Every so often, their hands brushed as they reached for the same document, and each time, they recoiled, aware of the tension, the professional closeness, and the unspoken undercurrent that had begun to develop between them. By mid-afternoon, a plan had solidified. Julian's strategy required Claire's signature to authorize certain actions that would restructure the obligations without violating the law. If executed properly, it could protect the Sterling Inn from default or demolition. The only question remaining was trust. Could Claire rely on Julian fully, even after their fraught first encounter? "I've laid everything out," Julian said finally, leaning back slightly. "The decision is yours. I've provided all the information, all the calculations. Legally, this is sound. But emotionally, I know trust is difficult." Claire studied him, taking in the meticulous care, the intensity of his gaze, the calm certainty that seemed almost inhuman. Her chest tightened as she realized the stakes, not just the inn, but the fragile thread of trust and potential connection between them. I need to think," she said softly, aware that her voice trembled. She wasn't just weighing legal strategy. She was weighing risk, emotion, and the possibility of allowing someone in who had previously seemed only a threat. Julian nodded, understanding without judgment. "Take the time you need. The documents remain here. I'll be ready whenever you are." As Claire walked away to the veranda, staring at the storm-lashed ocean, Julian remained seated, quietly reviewing the files again. He was aware of the subtle shift in her demeanor, the first sign of tentative trust forming. In his mind, he cataloged it, knowing that the next steps would require both patience and precision. This was the professional trap, a crossroads where strategy met human emotion. Julian had provided the path, but Claire held the power to act. And for the first time, he realized that the battle for the inn was not only about legality. It was about earning trust, navigating personal stakes, and confronting the unpredictable consequences of proximity, risk, and moral choice. By evening, a fragile, unspoken agreement had formed. Claire recognized the possibility of survival. Julian had demonstrated that he could act independently of the firm, that he could wield his authority to protect rather than destroy. And Julian, for his part, saw in Claire a resolve that matched his own, a willingness to fight, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. For both, this night marked a subtle but pivotal turning point, the first real emergence of trust, layered with tension, respect, and the faint spark of something dangerously compelling. The morning air in Silver Bay was heavy, tinged with salt and lingering rain from the previous night. The Sterling Inn was calm, almost deceptively peaceful. But beneath that calm, Julian Vance felt the weight of a storm far more dangerous than weather. His phone buzzed discreetly, messages from Vance and associates reminding him of deadlines, expectations, and their growing impatience. His firm demanded results, relentless and unwavering, as if the world could be reduced to performance metrics and signatures. Julian sat at the large oak table in the inn's study, scanning the latest emails. Each one bore the familiar pressure of a corporate giant: deadlines, urgent instructions, veiled threats. He exhaled slowly, aware of the irony. He was the firm's star attorney, the one trusted to enforce contracts, to push through defaults. Yet now, he was acting in direct opposition to their plans. The risk was immense. He could be terminated, professionally blacklisted, or worse. Claire entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of him, watching him carefully. "The firm's breathing down your neck," she observed, her tone soft but knowing. Julian looked up, eyes steady. "They don't understand. They see the documents, the numbers, but they don't see the consequences, the human cost. And they certainly don't see what matters here." He gestured toward the inn. "You're in. Your life's work." Claire studied him, the tension in her shoulders betraying her concern. "And you? You're going against them. I hope you know what that means for you." "I do," Julian said calmly. "Every move I make here is a calculated risk. But some risks are worth taking." The hours that followed were a delicate dance. Julian worked tirelessly, carefully reviewing the contracts and restructuring possibilities, while simultaneously managing the firm's expectations via brief, coded messages that avoided revealing the full extent of his plans. Each email he sent, each phone call he returned, was calculated to protect Claire without exposing his strategy prematurely. But even as he operated with precision, he felt the subtle, creeping tension of deception. By hiding portions of his communications with the firm, he risked not only professional consequences but personal fallout. Claire, unaware of the full extent, began to notice his occasional distraction, the way he sometimes hesitated before answering questions or muttered to himself over the documents. "Julian," she said at one point, leaning against the doorway, "you're hiding something." Her voice was gentle but firm. "If this is about strategy, I understand. But I can't help if you're keeping me in the dark." Julian paused, weighing the truth against necessity. He could tell her everything: the looming pressure from his firm, the potential repercussions, even the message from Mason. But doing so would compromise both the legal advantage and his ability to protect her. Instead, he chose a careful half-truth. "It's complicated," he said slowly, locking eyes with her. "Some things are better left unsaid until the time is right. Trust me, every move I make is to safeguard the inn and to give you control." Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering across her features. "I hope I'm not making a mistake trusting you." Julian's gaze softened for just a moment. Trust is always a risk, but some risks are worth taking. As the day wore on, the pressure from the firm intensified. Julian received a series of pointed messages from Mason and other senior partners, each one emphasizing urgency and consequences for noncompliance. Yet he continued to work quietly with Claire, outlining the legal framework that could allow her to retain control of the Sterling Inn, even if it meant directly defying his own firm. The tension was palpable, layered with dual stakes: external corporate pressure and the internal threat of eroding trust. Every decision Julian made walked the line between success and catastrophic failure. He was aware that one misstep could destroy not only his career but also the fragile rapport he had begun to build with Claire. By evening, the inn was calm again, but the atmosphere between them had shifted. Claire had seen glimpses of Julian's commitment, his willingness to risk everything for her protection. And yet, a small seed of doubt had taken root. The combination of his secrecy and the firm's looming influence created a tension neither could ignore. Julian looked at her across the table, the weight of unspoken pressures hanging between them. "Tomorrow, we'll finalize the plan," he said quietly. "For now, we prepare. Every detail matters." Claire nodded, a mix of apprehension and growing respect in her eyes. She understood the stakes were higher than she had imagined, not just legal, but deeply personal. And for the first time, she realized that Julian Vance, the man she had first seen as a corporate predator, was now her most critical ally and perhaps the most dangerous influence in her life. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within, the storm of corporate pressure, strategic maneuvering, and fragile trust, was only beginning. Twilight settled over Silver Bay, painting the horizon in shades of deep orange and violet. Inside the Sterling Inn, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Papers were meticulously laid out on the large oak table in the study, each document representing months of Claire's work, Julian's careful legal navigation, and the looming threat of corporate pressure. Julian Vance adjusted his tie, the weight of his senior partner access papers heavy in his briefcase beside him. The storm from earlier days had subsided, leaving the inn enveloped in the quiet hum of evening. The soft flicker of candlelight casting long shadows across walls lined with family portraits and shelves of well-loved books. Claire Sterling stood across from him, hands slightly trembling as she reviewed the final draft of the restructuring agreement. Every clause had been scrutinized, every legal loophole checked. She had come to trust Julian's expertise, even if she was still cautious about his motives. The knowledge that he had turned against his own firm to protect her had unsettled her in unexpected ways, stirring both gratitude and suspicion. "Everything is here," Julian said, his voice steady, precise. "I've double-checked every detail. If you sign, these documents will legally protect the inn from default or forced sale, at least temporarily. The emergency injunction is not permanent, but it will give us the time we need to act decisively." Claire's gaze flicked up at him, the faintest tension in her expression softening. "And I can trust that you haven't overlooked anything?" Julian shook his head. "I've left nothing to chance. Your signature will be binding, but the strategy is sound. You retain full control. My role is only to ensure that the documents are legally effective." A long silence stretched between them as she took a deep breath. The candlelight reflected in her eyes, revealing both resolve and vulnerability. Finally, she picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper for a moment. Then she pressed it to the signature line, committing herself to the plan they had painstakingly constructed together. Julian watched her, a mixture of relief and respect washing over him. "Done," he said softly, acknowledging both the legal and emotional weight of the act. The tension that had bound the room began to shift. The distance between them seemed to shrink, a magnetic pull neither fully understood nor could resist. Julian reached for the documents, sliding them gently toward her, and their hands brushed. The contact was fleeting, electric, and charged with the unspoken acknowledgement of trust, risk, and mutual understanding. Claire looked up, startled, and their eyes met. In that moment, the professional barrier they had maintained began to blur. The weight of the inn, the legal battles, the storm, all of it seemed to meld away, leaving only the raw immediacy of proximity, presence, and emotion. Without fully realizing it, the space between them closed further. Julian's hand rested lightly on the table, inches from hers, and Claire felt an unfamiliar warmth, a pull she hadn't anticipated. Words were unnecessary. The unspoken tension spoke volumes. The night deepened, and the inn's quiet enveloped them. With deliberate care, Julian moved closer, his voice low and controlled. "You've placed your trust in me," he said, almost a whisper. "I won't betray it." Claire's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her mind raced. This was not just about documents, not just about legal strategy. It was about choice, vulnerability, and the undeniable connection that had grown between them over the past days of storm, discussion, and proximity. One moment led to another. Their shared relief, the intensity of the legal victory, and the heightened emotional stakes culminated in a closeness neither had anticipated. They allowed themselves to be drawn together, tentatively at first, then with a deeper urgency, finding solace and connection in the aftermath of shared struggle. In the candlelit study of the Sterling Inn, the first night of intimacy between Claire and Julian unfolded, not as a careless act, but as a complex, charged acknowledgement of trust, attraction, and human connection forged under extraordinary circumstances. Yet, even in the heat of that moment, the shadow of doubt lingered faintly. Julian had carefully navigated his position, but the risk of corporate fallout and the intricate dance of trust remained just beyond the edges of their awareness. By the end of the night, they rested side by side, a fragile sense of unity and relief enveloping them. Claire felt a warmth, a temporary reprieve from the tension that had dominated the past days. Julian, for his part, understood the precarious balance. They had both crossed into new territory, where professional alliances, personal risk, and emotional connection were irreversibly intertwined. Outside, Silver Bay lay quiet under a sky still heavy with lingering storm clouds. Inside the Sterling Inn, the quiet was different, intimate, charged, and fleeting, a momentary illusion of safety before the challenges of the coming day would demand vigilance, strategy, and unflinching courage. The first light of dawn crept over Silver Bay, painting the coastline in muted shades of gray and pale gold. The night's intimacy lingered in the air of the Sterling Inn, a quiet testament to trust and vulnerability shared between Claire Sterling and Julian Vance. But that fragile sense of relief would not last. The shrill ring of the front doorbell shattered the morning calm. Claire stirred, disoriented, reaching for a robe as her heart quickened. Julian, still seated at the edge of the bed, straightened immediately, his expression a mixture of alertness and concern. Outside, uniformed court officers and legal representatives from the city had arrived, moving swiftly and with authority. They carried documents, badges, and the unmistakable air of impending enforcement. Claire's blood ran cold. What is this?" she whispered, rushing toward the window to glimpse the scene. Julian's eyes darkened. It seems the emergency injunction we anticipated wasn't fully executed yet. The firm, they acted faster than expected, or perhaps they were playing another game entirely. He rose, tense, and reached for his briefcase. "I need to handle this." The officers moved to enter the inn, and Claire felt a surge of panic. This was the nightmare she had feared, the sudden collapse of the legal protection she had counted on, the tangible threat to the Sterling Inn. Her pulse pounded in her ears. As Julian prepared to intervene, Claire's gaze fell on his phone, lying face up on the bedside table. A single notification glowed on the screen. "Good job on the signature. Apex is cleared for dawn." Her heart stopped. The words burned like acid. Betrayal, deception, manipulation, all the trust she had built over days and nights seemed to collapse instantly. The intimacy, the reliance, the shared victories, it all felt like a calculated ruse. Julian noticed her freeze. "Claire, don't," she said sharply, stepping back. Her hands shook as she held the documents tightly against her chest. I can't believe I trusted you." Her voice trembled, both from anger and the shock of realization. It's not what it looks like," Julian began, but she would not hear it. The officers presented the legal papers. The signed documents had indeed been altered, or at least interpreted in a way that left her temporarily vulnerable. Julian had used his privileged credentials to copy and protect information, but the timing, the firm's intervention, and the notification from Mason painted a picture of betrayal she could not ignore. Claire's mind raced, torn between desperation and fury. Her hands clutched the paperwork like a lifeline, yet she felt utterly powerless. Julian moved closer, carefully, but she stepped back instinctively. "I was trying to protect you," he said quietly, his eyes sincere. "I acted against my firm. I used the authority I still had to secure the inn, to find leverage before they could act. Every move I made was to save you and the Sterling Inn." Claire's gaze flickered to him, skepticism etched into every line of her face. "Then why does it feel like you used me? That everything, the night, the trust, was just a tactic?" Julian's throat tightened. He wanted to explain, to show her the meticulous steps he had taken, the risk he had assumed, the calculations behind every action. But the words faltered. She could not yet see the full picture. She only saw the message on his phone. She only felt the sting of perceived betrayal. I need time," Claire whispered, retreating to the far end of the room. Her eyes avoided his, fixed instead on the documents, on the looming threat, on the fragile remnants of trust now shattered. Julian exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had miscalculated the emotional fallout. Professionally, he had acted precisely. Strategically, he had done everything correctly. But the human element, the raw, unpredictable response of someone who had let him in, was beyond any formula, beyond any calculation. The officers finalized their paperwork and left, leaving Claire trembling and silent, the room thick with tension and unresolved anger. Julian remained, giving her space, but his eyes followed every movement. He had never been more certain that saving the inn would demand not only legal acumen, but also patience, courage, and the slow rebuilding of trust that had just been shattered. For Claire, the morning marked a crisis of faith. She had believed in Julian, had allowed herself to hope, had trusted him with both the inn and her heart. Now, all of it felt like a fragile illusion, threatened by one fleeting notification and the shadow of corporate manipulation. Julian, meanwhile, faced a dual battle against the firm he had once served and against the growing wall of mistrust he had inadvertently erected between himself and the woman he had come to protect. The night of connection had dissolved into a morning of doubt, and the true challenge of the Sterling Clause had only just begun. By midday, Silver Bay had taken on an air of tense anticipation. Outside the Sterling Inn, construction crews from Apex Development had arrived with heavy machinery, surveying the property with predatory precision. Orange fencing rattled in the wind, bulldozers idled like beasts ready to strike, and the distant hum of engines filled the coastal air. Claire Sterling stood at the veranda, heart pounding. Her hands gripped the railing as she watched the activity, the same mixture of fear and defiance that had fueled her since she inherited the inn. Every instinct screamed that her sanctuary, her family legacy, was under immediate threat. Julian Vance arrived at the inn shortly after the construction crews, his jaw set in a hard line. Just moments before reaching the curb, his phone had vibrated with a formal, cold notification. His status as senior partner at Vance & Associates was officially terminated, effective immediately. They had cut him loose, but they were a fraction too late. He had initiated a secure, encrypted session on his laptop while his credentials were still active in the car, a thin digital lifeline that was now the only thing standing between Apex and the inn. Claire looked at him sharply. "They fired you. They've made their decision," Julian said evenly, though a tightness around his jaw betrayed the personal cost. "For them, I'm expendable. For you, I still have options. But the threat is immediate. Apex is moving fast." The construction crews began removing the temporary barriers around the property. Bulldozers idled dangerously close, their engines growling like wolves. Claire's stomach dropped. This was no longer a legal battle on paper. This was tangible, physical encroachment. Julian stepped closer, voice low but urgent. "Claire, I need you to understand. My termination changes nothing about what I can do legally. But it does remove any professional shield I had. Everything we do now has to be precise, coordinated, and immediate." She swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the advancing machinery. "I can't believe this is happening, after everything." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the anxiety she had fought to suppress. Julian's gaze softened, fleetingly revealing the human side beneath the professional armor. "I know you feel betrayed. I know the trust we built has been tested, by the firm, by Mason, by the message you saw. But what matters now is the inn. We fight together, or we risk losing everything." The air was electric with tension, physical, emotional, and strategic. Claire could see Julian's dedication, the calculated risks he was willing to assume even without the firm's backing. But her heart struggled to reconcile the lingering doubt from the previous morning with the urgency of the present moment. A loud rumble signaled the start of active demolition. Bulldozers shifted forward, digging into the earth around the inn's perimeter. Claire's breath caught. She glanced at Julian, searching for a plan, for reassurance, for some sign that the man she had both trusted and doubted could protect them. Julian moved swiftly to the office inside the inn, retrieving the files and documents he had copied earlier using his privileged credentials. He spread them out on the table, pointing to critical evidence, emails, contracts, and correspondences between Apex and the town's assessors that revealed potential legal vulnerabilities. "These documents," he said urgently, "give us leverage. If we act now, we can force a legal halt, a temporary injunction, long enough to prevent any irreversible damage." Claire's hands shook slightly as she absorbed the plan, the weight of responsibility pressing down. You'd do this, even after they fired you?" Julian met her gaze with unwavering intensity. "Even after they fired me. I don't need the firm anymore. I only need to ensure this property is safe. I made a choice yesterday when I acted against them. Today, I stand by it." The bulldozers advanced another few feet, the threat now immediate and tangible. Claire drew a deep breath, feeling the surge of adrenaline, the urgency of the moment, and the faint, reluctant flicker of trust returning toward Julian. Together, they coordinated. Julian called in his legal authority, using the evidence he had meticulously gathered, while Claire ensured the inn was ready to present its case. Each movement, each instruction was deliberate, a ballet of strategy and courage under the watchful eyes of construction crews now hovering at the edges of the property. By late afternoon, the first legal hold was prepared, but the tension remained unbearable. Julian's termination had stripped him of formal authority within his firm, leaving him vulnerable, but he had gained a singular clarity of purpose: to protect Claire and the Sterling Inn, even if it meant risking everything. For Claire, the siege was more than external. It was a test of faith, judgment, and the fragile trust that had been frayed the day before. Watching Julian work tirelessly, placing himself in harm's way for her benefit, she could no longer ignore the complexity of their bond. Despite doubt, despite fear, she recognized a commitment that went beyond professional obligation, a loyalty forged under pressure and storm, danger and risk. The day ended with both watching the inn from the veranda. Construction temporarily paused, the bulldozers idle but threatening, and the first glimmers of hope flickering amidst the chaos. Julian had become, in that moment, both the architect of strategy and the human shield against corporate encroachment. Claire's wariness remained, but a quiet, grudging respect, and perhaps the first true thread of trust, had begun to weave itself between them. Outside, Silver Bay's winds whispered through the trees, echoing the tension within. Inside, the Sterling Inn stood resilient, a battleground not only of property and law, but of hearts, loyalties, and unspoken truths. Night had fallen over Silver Bay, casting long shadows across the Sterling Inn. The distant hum of idling machinery from Apex Development had ceased for now, but the air remained thick with tension. Inside the inn, the faint glow of candlelight reflected off polished surfaces, illuminating Julian Vance's focused expression as he prepared for a task that could either save the inn or destroy his career entirely. Claire Sterling watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the weight of every decision he was about to make. The events of the past days, the storm, the negotiation of legal traps, the night they had shared, and the harsh awakening, had all led to this moment. She still struggled to trust him fully, particularly after seeing Mason's message on his phone, but the urgency of the threat left little room for hesitation. Julian opened his laptop, the screen casting a cool blue light across his determined features. "I need to access the firm's internal communications," he said quietly. "Directly. Privileged channels only. I still have senior partner access. It's legal, controlled, and auditable. But it's risky. One wrong move, and my credentials are revoked, possibly permanently. Worse, it could be seen as misconduct." Claire's breath caught. "You're risking your license? Your career?" "I'm already terminated," he replied calmly. "This isn't about the firm anymore. It's about proving the collusion between Apex and the assessor. If we can show that, the inn can be protected and the firm's misuse of authority exposed. But yes, it's dangerous. And if you think I'm doing this lightly, you're mistaken." She hesitated, torn between fear and admiration. "I don't know if I can watch you risk so much." "You don't have to watch," he said, eyes locked on the screen. "But you should know that what I'm doing could either save everything or make things worse. I'm not hiding this from you because I want credit. I'm letting you see the stakes. This is the full measure of trust." Claire took a step closer, unable to tear her gaze from him. She realized that the man she had once thought manipulative, whose motives she had questioned after the Mason message, was now risking everything for her. And yet, the risk was real, undeniable. Julian navigated the firm's internal servers with precision. Every file he copied, every email he retrieved, was done using the authority he still legally held as a senior partner. There was no hacking in the criminal sense, only careful, methodical access under the guise of professional duty that the firm had granted him before termination. Hours passed. Julian's focus was absolute, his fingers dancing over the keyboard as he extracted documents proving communication between Apex Development and the town assessor, a direct link showing collusion to undermine the Sterling Inn. Every message, every email, every timestamp meticulously documented the conspiracy. Claire hovered nearby, torn between concern and awe. She watched him risk not only his reputation, but also the fragile trust between them. It was a dangerous gamble, one that carried the weight of everything she had fought to protect. Yet, she also felt the undeniable pull of admiration for the man who would act so decisively, even when it meant standing alone against both the firm and a corporate giant. Finally, Julian leaned back, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. We have it, he said quietly. Every piece of evidence needed to secure a temporary injunction, to stop the demolition, and to expose the conspiracy. But it's only temporary. The real challenge begins when we bring this to court. You'll have the documents, and we'll proceed carefully. But for now, we have leverage. Claire stepped closer, hands still slightly trembling. The tension in her chest began to ease, replaced by a complex swirl of gratitude, lingering distrust, and a tentative respect that bordered on admiration. You really did this for me, she said softly. I did it to protect the inn, Julian replied, eyes meeting hers. But also, because some things are worth the risk, no matter the personal cost. For the first time in days, a fragile trust began to take root again. Claire understood, in a way that words could not capture, that Julian's actions, risky, deliberate, courageous, were a testament to his commitment not only to the inn but to her. Yet, beneath the relief lay the simmering tension of what would come next. Confrontation with the firm, confrontation with Apex, and the delicate task of restoring full faith in a man she had been forced to doubt. Outside, the night was silent, the calm before the storm. Inside the Sterling Inn, strategy, risk, and tentative trust coexisted in fragile equilibrium, preparing them both for the trials that would define the next chapter of their battle. Morning broke over Silver Bay with a muted glow, the ocean reflecting shades of gray and pale gold. The Sterling Inn stood quietly, deceptively calm, as if the previous night's tension had been nothing more than a dream. But inside, the weight of decisions, risks, and lingering doubts pressed heavily on both Claire Sterling and Julian Vance. Julian arrived at the inn with a folder in his hands, thick with meticulously organized evidence. Emails, correspondence, contracts, and time-stamped communications proving collusion between Apex Development and the town assessor. Each document was a small triumph of careful legal maneuvering, a product of his calculated risk using senior partner access to extract the files. Claire's gaze, sharp and wary, fell on him immediately. Her arms were crossed, her body taut with unresolved anger from the Mason message she had seen days before. She did not speak at first, her eyes tracing the folder in his hands as if it could somehow explain the past, justify the night they had shared, or illuminate his true motives. This is everything, she asked finally, voice low and cautious. Julian nodded, placing the folder carefully on the table. Every piece of evidence we need for the emergency injunction. This can stop Apex, at least temporarily, but it also exposes the conspiracy, implicates the assessor, and clears your path to retain the Sterling Inn. Claire's hands hovered over the folder. The power was hers now, and with it came the ultimate choice. Trust Julian again, join forces with him, and take the risk of exposing herself emotionally and legally, or reject him entirely, acting alone and shielding herself from potential further betrayal. Julian stepped closer, voice steady but tinged with sincerity. I'm placing this in your hands. I don't ask for forgiveness, only trust. Not blind trust. Proof is here, but trust that I risked everything to bring this to you. My career is gone. My firm has turned against me, but I chose to protect you and the inn. Claire's heart raced. The evidence in the folder was undeniable, yet the shadow of doubt lingered. Could she reconcile the Mason message, the night together, and the past betrayals with the undeniable proof of his courage and dedication? I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered, her voice trembling. But I see everything you've done, and the risk you took. I see it. Julian's expression softened, the tension in his posture relaxing slightly, though his eyes remained watchful. That's all I ask for now. Look through it, verify it, use it. The choice to act, to fight, is yours. I only bring you the means. For a long moment, Claire remained silent, weighing every detail, every risk, every emotion that had brought them here. Then, slowly, decisively, she began to open the folder. Her eyes scanned the documents, absorbing the evidence that could halt Apex's demolition, expose the collusion, and finally secure the inn she had fought so hard to protect. A sense of resolve began to replace the fear and suspicion. She realized that the fight was not only against corporate greed and legal manipulation. It was about trust, about choosing to take a risk on someone who had proven his commitment through action, not words. Finally, she looked up at Julian, a mixture of determination and tentative trust in her gaze. "We do this together," she said firmly. "If we're going to save the inn, it's with both of us. I'll take the risk, again, but only with you." Julian allowed himself a faint, relieved smile. "Then let's stop Apex. And let's make sure the firm understands that loyalty and integrity aren't optional, even when they're inconvenient." Outside, Silver Bay remained calm, the waves lapping gently at the shore. Inside the Sterling Inn, the tension had shifted from doubt and betrayal to a precarious alliance, built on evidence, courage, and the rekindling of trust. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in days, Claire and Julian stood together, united in purpose and determination. The folder on the table was more than just paper. It was proof, leverage, and the first step toward reclaiming control. The road ahead was long, and the court battle was just beginning. But as they stood together on the veranda, the shadow of the bulldozers finally receded, replaced by the quiet, resilient dawn of Silver Bay. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.